The reading of the Old Testament scriptures from Isaiah, chapter 11, verses 6 through 9. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearlings together, and the little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. The young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And for the New Testament scripture reading, it's taken from Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 23. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like immortal human beings and birds and animals and reptiles.
Good morning. All right, so this is part two of a discussion that Dan started in July. Maybe multiple parts will come from this. So Dan started in July, first part, and Beth and Eric and Dan and I have had multiple discussions around climate change specifically, and then it's kind of evolved into other environmental impacts. But we've started and are focusing more specifically on climate change. So Dan started with, how do we as individuals, as a community following Christ, wrestle with climate change? Dan started with the why do we care? So why do we as Christians, as a CMF community and as individuals care about climate change? As I mentioned, Dan's been participating in a Faithful Leaders Climate Cohort. Is that right? Yeah, and just finished. So it's co-sponsored by MC Canada and MC USA. And as I mentioned, that's kind of what sparked Dan and Beth and Eric and I having these conversations about sharing ideas, what we can do as a congregation and also individuals to take action here. Let's see. So we've discussed a few different reasons, or maybe a group of reasons about why we care, and more specifically, how does our faith inform why we should care? Dan presented in his message in July the idea that we as Christians care about climate change because we're called to love thy neighbor. Our actions as a human civilization are resulting in our home planet's climate changing at a much, much faster rate than it ever has in the past. And this is resulting in significant impacts to us as humans, as our neighbors today, and also to future folks that are going to inherit this planet from us. Dan drew what I found was a surprising and yet really powerful parallel between the civil rights movement and our call to action today to react to climate change. So I hadn't thought about that before, but I think that there's a lot of really strong parallels that I'll circle back through today. For both the civil rights movement and climate action, we're called as Christians not by some, and this is, I'm reiterating a point that Dan made, we're called not by some clear biblical directive to end slavery and save the planet, but are instead called to use an interpretive lens in light of Christ's more general teachings to love our neighbor, seek peace and justice, and care for the poor, to respond to our current cultural situations, right? Jesus' message remains constant even though our cultural situation changes, and climate change is certainly part of our current cultural situation. Today I hope to start talking about and getting us thinking about the what, right? So we talked about the why do we care, and we want to start thinking about the what. What ways can we be and what things can we do in response to climate change? But before we jump into that, I want to reiterate there are many reasons why we care, and we should keep that discussion open, right? I think that the more that I worked on preparing this, the more that I kept coming back to the why. I think that informs and motivates our actions that we want to take, and is a really important foundation there. So as we talk about what to do, let's look at this model that Dan started with in part one. I need to turn this on. Jean told me I needed to turn it on, and I forgot that step. All right, the clicker is now on. Okay, so Dan shared this last time. So, we want to keep things simple, right? So it's useful to have models for things. So our lifestyle and actions result in changes to Earth systems, which result in harm to the Earth and living things. And this can apply to a lot of environmental impacts, but we want to talk specifically about climate change, and so we want to introduce the idea of greenhouse gases, right? So without getting way into the weeds, as we extract from lower layers of our Earth carbon fuels and burn them and release that carbon into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide and methane build up in the atmosphere. This traps heat in our atmosphere and causes our climate to change more rapidly than it has in the past, and is impacting a lot of Earth's systems. So it's not just that things are getting warmer. This is a big complex thing, which we'll talk about. But we wanted to introduce that piece of it. So the greenhouse gases are specifically what is applying to climate change. And the conversations that we've been having expand beyond climate change. So again, we've started talking about this, but we often get talking about other things. So mass extinction, microplastics, plastic waste in general, persistent man-made compounds like PFAS and fire retardants, and these things that we're seeing more headlines about. And so I think that these are all important, and a lot of the message that I have today can apply to a lot of these things, and maybe even things beyond environmental impacts. But we wanted to, just draw this out as we're talking about climate change, because I think this is probably the most pressing and more challenging thing of all of those that I just mentioned. We wanted to kind of give some specificity to the greenhouse gas and the climate change piece of it. Okay, so what do we do in response to climate change? Okay, so I started simple. So the first thing, I think we should go outside. I think this is a good place to start because for one thing, it's simple, and it's also foundational in giving us motivation to act. So a parallel maybe, if I mentioned I'd draw back on the civil rights parallel that Dan made. So a parallel to the civil rights movement might have been to spend more time with people and to see the good in all people, right? So that's I think, a driver for what drove and motivated a lot of folks in the civil rights movement. And so the parallel here might be to go outside for us, right? We want to experience, and I think some of the music and the liturgy this morning, I think, spoke to a lot of that. So go outside, walk, or better yet, saunter, sit, observe, listen, take your shoes off, lay in the grass, contemplate the life around you and the connectedness and miracle of it all, and be in awe, right? I think that we are not enough in awe. We're a lot of the time absorbed in our phones and in all of our gadgets in our busy life, and so it's important I'll bring my phone up on the podium so I can see what time it is as I bash my cell phone. Yes. So go outside, be in awe. There's no wrong way to do it. You'll find outside more and more reasons why to care, and you might even come across or find some inspiration on what to do. It seems that we're becoming an even more anxious people. There's a lot to be anxious about, and we have constant, instant access to an incredible amount of information. More and more of us are feeling anxious, and we're turning to coping mechanisms that have significant negative impacts on our physical and mental health. We're spending an incredible amount of time and energy checking in on the curated online lives of folks we know and folks we don't know, and it's resulting in us feeling inadequate and burnout. Yeah. This is not a picture of the peaceful people God has called us to be, or that our Anabaptist theology calls us to be. Seeking peace being one of the core convictions of our Anabaptist theology. I think information overload is an important driver of this anxiety, but I think an equally important driver is our continuous move away from the connection with the natural world. So you can find a lot of statistics out there about how more infrequently we're going outside. So again, we need to start with going outside, I think. So next, let's envision a better future, right? So I think it's important that we envision something and move toward it instead of always be moving away from something. I think it's easier sometimes to bash and move away from things and look at the negative side of things than it is to move forward towards something. But I think that's really what we need to focus on to see progress here. 2 weeks ago, Jean shared with us a message about prophetic ministry. Jean noted that prophetic ministry is a call forth to an understanding that is radically different from what is around us. The kingdom of God is the alternative reality, and we need to play an active role in visioning and building the kingdom of God. In order to energize people into action, we need to present a clear picture of the new reality or the new possibility. One of the notes that I jotted down from Jean's message, because it ties so well to these discussions that Dan and Eric and Beth have been having, is that whether something is feasible doesn't matter until the vision can be fully embraced. I thought that was really powerful, right? We get hung up on the feasibility of things sometime and prevent it from letting us have a clear vision of what we want to see. We get so tied up in what's not feasible. And this applies to a lot of things in life, right? There's a lot of voices in our heads, oh, you can't do this isn't going to work, right? And it shuts down us having a vision of what we want to see the world to be, whether applying to climate change or other things. So how do we move beyond being activists and becoming prophets? Dan mentioned growing up, he was proud that the Christian community was well represented in the civil rights movement. And that we may today be called to be climate activists and maybe aren't so well represented among that group, the Christian community. But I'm wondering, can we move beyond participating in climate activism to prophetic ministry surrounding climate action, as Gene mentioned in his sermon? Imagining developing a clear picture of a better future gives us something to move toward. Perhaps it's the case that an activist might say, this is bad, stop doing this, where a prophetic approach is more focused on what is good and how to move toward that. By doing this, we're focusing our energy on what to do more than on the what not to do or what not to be. So it's not fossil fuels are bad and we all need to stop using them. It's there's a better way, a future where we use more healthy energy sources that result in less harm to ourselves and the world we live in. So as such, I think it's okay to appreciate the role fossil fuels have played in our past and to not be all negative about everything. I think that perspective is key to preventing divides, and we'll talk about that a little further on down, as I think working together collectively is a huge part of this. So I think one question we need to ask as we envision a better future, as we develop new technologies and make life easier, right? So there's a lot we've done in the last 200 years to make life easier. I think we need to be asking ourselves, why are we doing these things? What are we trying to get out of these advances? Are we doing this so that we can consume more things, or are we doing this for another reason? Because it seems like that's largely what we're getting out of it. And there's a lot of other good things that we're getting out of our technological advances, and I don't want to minimize those. But we also, I think, as we envision the future looking forward, we need to have an idea of what we want to get out of these things. But the challenge of this is breaking our connection to this economic machine that is largely the basis of our culture. So next we'll move into the next idea, which is moving away from consumerism. So Gene mentioned in a sermon about prophetic ministry about how Brueggemann observed that the dominant culture in America is consumerism. And it's hard to deny that. I think that makes a lot of sense from what I see when I look around. Envisioning a future that involves a move away from consumerism is not an easy transition, but it's likely part of the climate solution. So I studied civil and environmental engineering, and I am a civil and environmental engineer, and I work in water, wastewater. Now, environmental engineering, in our environmental engineering curriculum, we learned to assign value to things that historically was ignored. So things like wastewater, industrial waste, so think about the Superfund site we now have here behind us, and emissions. A lot of these things, as we develop technologies, we fail to see that things carry a cost. So just dump the waste over there, push the wastewater to the nearest stream, burn whatever fuel is cheapest to obtain, and it's the most efficient and profitable way to operate a business. And it's not always ill-intentioned at the beginning. Sometimes we just don't understand the cost of things. But operating this way keeps things cheap, keeps our stuff cheap, and keeps our 401ks growing. And so there's this economic machine and motivation there. But as we all know, but maybe still some of us still don't accept, all of these things have costs. And they've always had costs, but by ignoring these costs, one party, the party ignoring the costs, just pushes these costs off on someone else for their short-term benefit and gain. So as environmental engineers, we try to figure out how to assign costs to these things. How do we handle industrial waste so that it isn't a soil contamination in the future? How do we handle and treat wastewater so that others downstream of us aren't impacted by our savings? And how do we now assign an appropriate cost to carbon emissions to assure that our grandchildren aren't paying the true cost of our now cheap energy? The more I got through my environmental engineering curriculum, the more I felt like the solution to the climate change challenge might be more significantly impacted by being an economist than being an environmental engineer. It seems like it really is more the crux of it. We build a society based on consumption and growth, but as we're experiencing, we have a limited amount of resources and we can't just keep growing and consuming more. Even if we unlock breakthroughs like nuclear fusion or other low-cost carbon-free energy sources in the next decade, we won't be able to just flip a switch. The systems we've built, these economic, political, cultural systems don't pivot that easily. So how do we break away from all this? On a large scale, I don't know. I think it's a really complex problem. But I think maybe we start with individual decisions that and hopefully community decisions as a CMF community, as a Christian community, as a local community that can start to break this mold. And I think one of the ways we start is paying attention to where we spend money and how we spend our money. I think our daily choices and long-term investments impact the process that is in place now. So this is where spiritual conviction comes in. From an Anabaptist perspective, there's a call to move away from Christendom, the entanglement of church with state, status, wealth, and force. That entanglement doesn't reflect Jesus. Instead, we're invited to a spirituality that connects deeply with economics, to live simply, share generously, care for creation, and work for justice. So again, I think these are some ways that specifically our Anabaptist tradition can inform how we should be acting today. This shift will likely involve what, at least at first, might feel like significant sacrifices. But I think, and related to the first point of going outside, I think that we'll find that a lot of these things aren't sacrifices, but are actually going to make life simpler and make us more grounded people and maybe a little less hectic and confused. So, all right, the next one. So what's the easiest way to make climate change go away? We can just pretend it doesn't exist, right? Unfortunately, we're seeing this right now across all kinds of topics in our culture. When things get complicated and messy, someone suggests a response that either completely ignores the issue at hand or greatly oversimplifies it. And a lot of people get on board because doing so feels a lot less overwhelming than confronting the complexity. So I think the next point I wanted to make was to accept the complexity. Accept the complexity of climate change. This doesn't mean that we all need to become scholars on the issue, Well, let's understand that our understanding of how our lifestyle impacts the climate and how the planet is responding to these impacts is extremely complicated and difficult to fully comprehend or to simplify. This means that the scientific body and resulting policy will change with time. This can be discouraging, especially with our short attention span culture that expects short, instant answers all of the time. It's a natural response then to feel like if this is changing all the time, then folks clearly don't know what they're talking about and this can't be right? So we need to resist that oversimplification. I think though that this oversimplification also shows up on the other side of the spectrum and can be the source of feelings of disappointment and helplessness. We can say, hey, this is easy. We just need to turn off all fossil fuel plants, stop making combustion engines, and pivot completely towards solar and wind in the next 3 years, and the problem's solved. I'd argue that this view is not that different from the view of deciding to ignore climate change altogether because it oversimplifies things. I think that our role here is, again, not to become experts on the nuance of climate science, but to accept the complexity. Resist the narrative that oversimplifies either side of the debate and remain resilient to remembering why we care and be willing to do the hard work to navigate this complex topic. Keep caring, keep learning, keep choosing alignment over apathy, because how we are, not just what we do, shapes the future. Progress doesn't come from oversimplification. Community is messy, right? We as a community are often struggling how to be a community. That, like climate change, is a complex and messy thing that we can't oversimplify. Life is messy. Truth is messy, but that doesn't mean we stop showing up. So accept the complexity. So last one, as we navigate our response to climate change, we need to pay attention to our posture. How we carry ourselves and how we are reacting towards others determines whether we're welcoming others along or turning them away. And I think it's imperative that we welcome others along on this journey. So individual actions we're each called to take when it comes to climate response are going to look different from everybody, are going to look different for everyone. So that's why I'm somewhat hesitant to rattle off a simple list of things to do to impact climate change. Things like buying a heat pump, flying less, invest in alternative energy, use LED light bulbs, conserve resources. I think these are all great things. I'm not discouraging any of them. But I also want to point out that these are going to look different for everybody. So just as oversimplification doesn't bring progress, neither does judgment. In fact, the judgment will often stall it. In the civil rights movement, real change didn't come from shaming individuals into submission, right? We didn't look back at people that were doing things wrong. That's not where the progress came from, right? It came from organizing, educating and showing up with courage and clarity. I also think that grief plays a role in our posture and in how we respond to others. So it's important that we remind ourselves of what we value and what we've lost and what we're still fighting for. So I think that that's something that I haven't hashed that thought all the way out here, but we may in our discussions hash out more. Okay, there's the 5 things I wanted to talk about. So here we are. I may feel there are a lot of alarm bells going off around us, climate alarm bells and many other alarm bells. But let's try to move away from despair and toward hope. Let's try to see this as an opportunity to put our faith into action. And by doing so, show our faith to our community and to our world. Can we even see climate change as an opportunity to show our neighbors Christ's unique message of love, and perhaps even the unique position we as Anabaptists are in to respond to it? Thanks.